Now, this is a big question I've gotten a lot. Can you legally use samples? Can you legally resample in music? This is extremely complicated. I'm scraping the surface here, and I'm going to start off with a on the record answer and then move to a off the record answer. Now, first off, on the record, what is the legal terms? Now, if you use a royalty-free database, when you have the rights to that music, of course you can use those samples. So for example, if you go on Splice Sounds, arguably the biggest music database for samples in terms of legal samples that you could download and use, of course, that's in the terms. You can legally download those samples, use it in your music, no issue there. However, on the other end, which I feel like is the bigger point of this video, let's say you take a sample out of someone's song. Sampling is very common, especially in hip-hop. Probably the biggest genre, I feel like, when it comes to sampling and resampling. Electronic music is big on this too. A lot of genres use sampling and resampling. And as a side note, kind of tomato-tomato. If someone says sampling or resampling, they're kind of using the same way. Overall, again, I'm making this video very simple. So let's say I use a snippet of someone else's song in one of my songs. It is illegal. For the most part, you cannot use any part of another person's song, especially if it's copyrighted, in your own music. Now, I've heard some people say, well, what about if it's 3 seconds or less? I've heard this myth a lot in a bunch of different places where there's like a time limit, where it's like, well, if you use only 2 seconds, it's legal, but if you use 3 or more seconds, illegal. No. Any amount of time that you use, any portion of any song that is copyrighted that you use in your music is illegal. Now, there are a couple exceptions. For example, one, if you get clearance. Like, so you talk to that artist and they're like, oh yeah, you know what, go for it. I like what you're doing with this one sample on my record, and you're putting it in your own song in a unique way. Yeah, that's cool. You can go for it. So let's say you get clearance. Of course, you should be good. Another thing is fair use. Now, fair use is incredibly complicated. I'm not even going to really touch upon it in this video, but let's say, and again, I'm making this up, you make a history video for YouTube. You're doing like a history education lesson about some time period, and you use a brief snippet of a song in that time period to kind of demonstrate what the music was like. You potentially could argue it's fair use because you're using it in an educational way. Again, fair use can get very complicated. There are a bunch of different clauses of fair use, from educational use to potentially using it in a parody-like format. If you look at like Weird Al Yankovic, but he's also not resampling and sampling. Again, this can get very complicated. But overall, summing this up, if you use a sample in someone else's song and it's copyrighted and you don't have the rights to it, you don't have the clearance, it is illegal. That is the on-record answer. 100%, you cannot do it. Off the record. This is where things get very vague. I almost didn't want to make this video because of this reason. There's this unspoken rule in music, actually somewhat spoken to. I've heard some artists even say this vocally out loud, that good musicians copy, but the best musicians steal. I've heard that quote a lot. Here's the oddly unspoken but somewhat spoken rule in music as an off-the-record answer, and that is this. If you resample, if you use a sample from someone else's work, you take it into your own work, but you mangle it, you reverse it, you pitch it down, you add a bunch of effects to it, you chop it up, you do all this stuff to it, to the point where the sample is very hard to distinguish from the original, you kind of get a pass, if that makes sense. I know that sounds kind of odd, and one thing I want to stress is, remember, this video is for entertainment purposes only. I am not your lawyer. This is not meant to be legal advice. I want to say that. However, though, there is this odd thing in music that if, let's say, you take someone else's sample, the original sample, pretty much untouched, and put it in your music, well, that's illegal, because what are you doing, right? However, a lot of musicians, if they see someone use their sample, but they do it in such a way that they transform, they mangle, they mash, there's a bunch of techniques to really jump up or mix up a sample. If they do it in such a way that makes it more creative and makes it more unique, and transforms it in a way that allows it to add into their own music in a very creative way, they usually get a pass. So they're like, oh, you know what? That was really dope the way they did that. Hip-hop is a prime example of this. A lot of hip-hop artists have taken tons of older records, whether it's a jazz record, a funk record, another hip hop record from back in the day. They take one beat, one bass line, one maybe horn groove. They then mangle it, mash it, pitch it up, pitch it down. Again, using all these techniques, but they do it in such a way that when they put it in the song, they have that, plus their own bars, right? Their own kind of vocals, plus other stuff that they've personally made. And it's done in such a way that the whole approach to it and the whole kind of creative work of it is so big that you almost can't even tell that sample is from something else. Unless you, like, say, went into it and was like, oh, wait, I forgot it's a sample. They pitch it down by 6 semitones. They also reversed it and chopped up the first and the third bit. A great video, actually, and this is coming into electronic music now, is by Jim Pavlov. He kind of broke down Prodigy's Smack My Bitch Up song. Great record. And Prodigy resampled an insane amount of songs, but he resampled each one, took a little bit of each sample, combined all these songs into one super well-made record. It's a great video to watch. I'll post the link to the video in the description if you want to check it out. And that's a great example of someone really taking one little bit from a song and transforming it and making it into something that's just wild. So this does get tricky, though. That's one thing I do want to say, because it is possible. It is possible, like, say, if you are a hip-hop artist, you resample an old funk bass line from back in the day, like, say, in the 50s or 60s, and you're like, oh, this is fire, I want this in my new record. You do all this stuff to it. Someone notices it and says, wait a minute, this bass line's from this song, but they just did this and this and this to it. Could someone potentially go after you legally? There is that possibility. That's why I wanted to give kind of the on-the-record and off-the-record kind of approach to this. And that's why, obviously, getting clearance, making sure that things are okay, are generally the best practice. However, there is that kind of off-the-record approach. You know, for me personally, if, let's say, someone took one of my songs, resampled a part of it, and this, I think, has happened, actually, and used it in their own record in a unique way, I think that's cool. I'm like, you know what, that's awesome. That's a creative approach. But if someone took a part of my song and didn't change anything to it, I'd be more likely to go to them and say, you didn't do anything creative with this. You just dropped it in it like it was your own. There is that kind of creative, I don't know what the word is, leeway for a lot of artists where if they see someone using it in a unique way. For example, for me, one of my songs, actually, Bassfire, someone did a rap cover of. So they took my song Bassfire, which is purely instrumental. It's an EDM song, or a dubstep song, being more specific, and they spit over it. They spit bars over it, and it came out great. And I love that because they kind of had to chop up my song in a unique way, do some stuff to it, then spit over it. And I was like, this is cool. Because they're doing something more to it that makes it more unique and more interesting. That was the overall thing. But at the end of the day, one thing I do want to say is, remember, this video is for entertainment purposes only. I am not your lawyer. This is not meant to be legal advice. Overall, if you're using a copyrighted sample, you cannot use it in your own work. It does not matter the exact time of it. It is illegal. There are some exceptions, but you're better off being safe than sorry. Look into it if you are doing so. However, on the other end, there is this kind of off-the-record approach that if you do use a sample, for most musicians, remember this is a case-by-case basis, use it in such a way that really warps it in such a unique way and also such a creative way that makes it stand out as it's a unique thing separate from the original sample. Usually for most musicians, they give you a pass. But remember, this depends person to person.